Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Bauma. I will be the moderator for this event. There are a few more people joining, and we would like to give them time to join. We're supposed to start at 10. We can give ourselves 3 more minutes and start by 10:05. By then, those who would also have joined, then we can start. So please be patient with us and give us about 2 more minutes for those joining to do so. Thank you. Hello once again, everyone. My name is Alex Wahuma. As I said, welcome to this webinar. I'll be moderating. Letitia, kindly share your screen.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much. So, thank you for responding to the invitation to participate in this webinar, which will be a presentation of the findings of an assessment done by the GrEEn project on blended finance options for co-funding and de-risking mechanisms for green SMEs. So here, let me turn on my video. You can see my face now. My name is Alex Bauma. I'll be moderating. The person to be doing the presentation for us is Letitia Vani. She can briefly introduce herself and I'll take over. Letitia, please.
Yes, so good morning again. I'm Letitia, a Senior Portfolio Analyst at Innohub, and also on the research team for this project.
Okay, thank you very much, Letitia. Thank you very much, Letitia. So we move on to a bit of house rules before we get into the actual presentation. This webinar, first to know is that it's been recorded. So your comments, your questions, and everything is being recorded. So just for you to know. The next thing is there will be opportunity for you to make contributions and to ask questions. You know, as the when the presentation is over. And to do that, you know, as most of us are familiar with webinars now, you can raise your hand, use the raise hand function to do that. But in addition, you can also put your comments into either the Q&A section, and the questions will be read to the panel members. In addition to that, so because of that, our preference is for you to hold on with any questions you may have until the presentation is over, unless you want to write it in the chat box, and that's also fine. There's a poll. We want to have an idea of the background of those who are joining the call. So there's a poll. As you log on, you see it. So please, we'd want to encourage all of you to respond to it. We just want to know the background of the organizations that are participating. Yes, so here we just want to know the types. So are you public, private? That's what we want to know. So please take time to respond to that. Having said that and having laid down the ground rules, we would begin with a brief introduction of the GrEEn project. So, Letitia, please the next slide. Permit me to now turn off my video. The bandwidth is quite low for me, so to be clear, I would have to turn it off. So, thank you for the permission. As we said, this is a presentation by the GrEEn project. The GrEEn project is basically GrEEn is an acronym for boosting green employment and enterprise opportunities in Ghana. That is the GrEEn project. It's funded by the European Union Trust Fund for Africa, and co-implemented in Ghana by UNCDF, that's the UN Capital Development Fund, and SMV, Netherlands Development Organization. Of course, the parent or the mother organization for the project is the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. The project is being implemented into regions, Ashanti region and the Western region. And these are the two regions that that have shown to be either the source of irregular migration or places where people return to, after they return back to the country. So there's that bit of migration focus. In these two regions, the project is being implemented in 10 districts. In the Western region, in the now Western region, there are four MMDAs or 4 districts where the project is being implemented. And in the Ashanti region, there are 6 districts. So in terms of the geographic scope of the project, these are the areas where the project is being implemented. As the presentation goes on, there will be opportunity for you to ask questions about the project, and my colleagues who lead on various aspects of the project would respond to the specific questions that you have. But the project has a focus on GrEEn, and ultimately what we seek to do is to contribute to achieving or creating sustainable and climate resilient local economies, and by so doing, create green jobs and green enterprises. As I said, the project is being implemented by 2 organizations, UNCDF and SMV. But specifically for SMV, which is the organization I work for, 2 things that the project will be doing. First is the provision of skills development to young people, women, and returnees, so they can become micro entrepreneurs, self-employed, or wage employees in 3 sectors that SMV is interested in: agri, renewable energy, and WASH. Those are the sectors that SMV specializes in. So we are training young people, women, and returnees to be either micro entrepreneurs or wage employees, in these sectors, giving them the skills they need to be relevant in these sectors in the 2 regions. Another aspect of our work is it's supporting SMEs through our incubation and acceleration program, and giving them the right kinds of tools, the skills they need to be able to scale up, expand, make their product or service more green, become a bit more profitable, and be able to employ a lot more people. So that's the work we do with SMEs. My colleagues who are on will throw more light, when we get to the Q&A section. So that is all about the GrEEn project, but specifically about the components that SMV leads on. And now to the main presentation, blended finance. So as you have seen from the introduction I've made, SMV, it's supporting SMEs. And as we know locally, access to finance tends to be a very huge challenge for a lot of the SMEs that are in a country, either because they are unaware of the sources, or they are not adequately positioned to be able to attract finance, but that is more on the demand side. On the supply side, which is to do with the financial institutions, issues to do with their inability sometimes to come up with products that specifically addresses the needs of the SMEs. So one area that has come up is the area of blended finance. The question of blended finance, which looks at the mobilization of private and public funds for supporting sustainable development, in this case, SMEs. So what we sought to do through this assessment is to scan the horizon, scan through a country and look at what are the available blended finance options, that we can market or promote to the SMEs that are on the GrEEn project or those that will be coming onto the GrEEn project. So at this point, I would now want to hand over to Letitia, who led the research, and she'll be making the presentation to all of us. So Letitia, please take over.
Thank you. And thank you all once again for joining us. It's a privilege to have you participate, considering that this is a busy time of the year. So we at Innohub, much of our work centers around access to finance for SMEs. And as Alex explained, with support from SNB, we conducted the research on assessing the availability of blended finance for GrEEn SMEs. And again, as he mentioned, we focused on those that operate in the Ashanti region and the Western region. I'll be presenting the findings momentarily, after which we look forward to having a discussion. So I would appreciate your feedback, especially if there were key points that were not picked up in the research. If you have any questions, as Alex mentioned, you could drop them in the chat box, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So the objectives are to identify financial institutions that provide blended finance, and then have a discussion on the type of support that they provide. We'll also look at gender dimensions that we came across in the research, having to do with supports from these financial institutions. We'll also look at risk factors that could prevent SMEs from accessing blended finance, and that will be followed up with de-risking mechanisms. And finally, a discussion on how the GrEEn project can support SMEs in the green economy. So as a background to the discussion, we know that SMEs make up 90% of registered businesses. They engage over 70% of the total workforce. Yet, time and time again, we see that lack of access to finance hinders their growth and remains a major issue. So blended finance presents an option that could help mitigate the risks, especially for green SMEs. And as Alex provided, blended finance is the use of development finance to mobilize additional capital, and it's all centered around achieving sustainable development. So now, we surveyed 96 SMEs, and this is a profile of what those SMEs look like. We see over half of them having operations in the Ashanti region. We see 31% having operations in the Western region and fewer in the Greater Accra region, because this was not a region that was focused on. In terms of the sectors, 67% represented with the agriculture sector, and very few of them in the renewable energy sector, and almost a quarter having identified with the wash sector. Also, looking at the gender ratio, most of the SMEs were male-led or had male founders, and we see about a quarter of them being female-led. Looking at the legal structure, unsurprisingly, most of them are registered as sole proprietorships. We had one that wasn't yet registered as at when the survey was being carried out, but chances are, if it's registered at this point, it might be a sole proprietorship. We had fewer limited liability and even much fewer partnerships. We also surveyed and interviewed financial institutions and intermediary organizations. With financial institutions, we had most of them being banks, and then the rest being non-bank financial institutions, having a total of 8 respondents. Looking at the intermediary organizations, we see a more diverse group, most of them offering accelerator and incubator services, but we also see investment platforms, development organizations, NGOs, and so on. Now here we have a snapshot of identified institutions that provide support to green SMEs. And we see that there are some that specifically target green SMEs. Others look more at the impact on the environment and social fronts, regardless of whether the SMEs are green. And some provide support to all SMEs. And in this case, green SMEs could take advantage by meeting certain eligibility criteria. And this criteria could be demonstrating a viable business model with growth potential, earning consistent revenue, having positive cash flows, creating impact, and so on. We also had banks that offer traditional debt, and in addition to that, provide basic technical assistance. And this technical assistance could be in the form of business development support. Here is a graphical representation of those institutions identified, as well as the type of support provided. And we see that what comes up the most in terms of support is business development and capacity building support, as well as debt. And then after that, we see grants, we also see equity. We asked the SMEs how difficult it was for them to access blended finance. And the response that came up the most was that it was difficult. Looking at the gender dimension, we see more male-led SMEs claiming it's difficult compared to female-led SMEs. With the difficulty level rising to very difficult, we see more female SMEs saying it's very difficult compared to the male-led SMEs. And the respondent who saw access to blended finance as easy turned out to be a male-led SME. Now, we also asked if they had applied for blended finance, and if they had, what the responses were. We saw that 45% of our total respondents had never applied for blended finance. We also saw 17% who had either applied once and been granted, or applied once and not been granted. And then we had a few other responses where the SMEs had applied but only been granted a portion of what they requested, or applied more than once and not been granted on all occasions. Again, having a gender dimension to that response, we see that it is more likely for female-led SMEs to not have applied compared to the male-led SMEs. And one interesting bit was female-led SMEs were more likely to have applied once and been granted compared to the male-led SMEs. So we see 22% on the side of the female-led SMEs, whereas for those who had applied once and been granted, we see 15% on the side of the male-led SMEs. For those who had not applied, which made up 45%, we asked them why they hadn't. And the responses that came up was they were not aware that such support existed. Some said the application procedures were complex, and others even believed that even if they had applied, it would not have been approved. There were more responses that we could have gender lens on, and we are going to look at these in the next few slides. So the first is looking at the number of females in management positions in these SMEs. We saw that there were a little more female-led SMEs who had 1 and 2 females in a management position compared to the male-led SMEs. So the others, where we see 22% and 40%, these were responses where the SMEs either had 3 or more females in a management position, but the percentages were too little and therefore were collated to see these figures, to get these figures. We asked the SMEs what they required funding for. And we saw that across both groups, about half of them needed it for working capital support, and a little less than half for acquisition of fixed assets. We went on to find what they perceive to be limiting factors to them raising funding. And we have interesting responses here. We see more female-led SMEs identifying insufficient documentation as a limiting factor compared to the male-led SMEs, where only 14% identified insufficient documentation as a limiting factor. Looking at insufficient collateral, there were much more male-led SMEs identifying this as a limiting factor compared to just 4% of the female-led SMEs. And also, high interest rate was more of a limiting factor for the female-led SMEs than the male-led SMEs. Again, finding out what they perceive to be risks to their operations, on both sides, more identified operations risk, and then we also see a combination between operations, market, and supply chain risks. Now, the yellow sections are when they had a combination of operations, market, supply chain, and some specific risks based on the businesses that they run. So for example, we had a few responses identifying disease outbreak and death as a risk to the operation because these were businesses that reared animals. Now, we also wanted to find out how much these SMEs earned. And we saw that for the bracket between 50,000 and 100,000 cedis, we see the ratio being very similar, 35% on the side of female-led SMEs and 38% on male-led SMEs. But we also see that among the SMEs surveyed, no female-led SME earned in the bracket between 20,000 and 50,000, but we have 15% on the side of the male-led SMEs. We also had a few of them who didn't earn revenue and could be in a pre-revenue stage. So that is 13% on the female side and 10% on the male side. We wanted to find out if they had the minimum requirements if they were to try to raise funding. And we saw that there were more female-led SMEs who had either a business plan or a combination of business plan and financial projections compared to the male-led SMEs. Again, the 65% and 85% bit we see is where they had a combination of either business plan, financial model, financial management system, collateral, board of directors. But again, the responses here were, the percentages were very little. And so they added up to get us to these figures. They were not significant enough to be presented on their own. Now, looking at the risk factor as a whole, we see that operations comes up as the most cited operations risks, and that is followed by a combination between operations, market, and supply chain risk. Looking at the critical limiting factor again, high interest rates were the most cited, and from the analysis we saw earlier, this is most likely to be cited by female-led SMEs. And after that, we see insufficient collateral, which again is most likely to be cited by male-led SMEs. And we also have insufficient documentation as a critical limiting factor, and others such as financing or funding not being available. We asked financial institutions and intermediaries based on the interactions and experience with SMEs what they believe to be the most risks presented by SMEs. And what came up the most was lack of records, lack of proper documentation, and lack of competent team. After that, we also see lack of collateral and also lack of internal control, weak governance structure. And we see that most of the SMEs we surveyed were registered as sole proprietorships. And being registered as a sole proprietorship opens a business up to some of these risks that we see. So there will be a high likelihood of weak internal controls, or governance structure, and so on. The recommended de-risking mechanisms, the one that came up the most is implementation of non-financial support programs. And this could be in the form of technical assistance, capacity development, which shows up in incubation and acceleration programs. We also see the SMEs ensuring formalization of their business structure and looking at proper reporting of financial information. So some of these de-risking mechanisms are responsibilities of the SMEs to implement, and some would require support from financial institutions and intermediary organizations. In conclusion, we've seen that there's an opportunity to create tailored support for green SMEs, and tailored in terms of the sectors they belong in, the stage of the business's development, and also the type of leadership. It could be put simply as whether the SME is female-led or male-led, looking at the different responses that came from both ends. We could also encourage female participation in the green economy to improve the 3-to-1 male to female ratio bias we saw earlier. We could also look at equipping green SMEs with information on the available supports, that is the various types of supports, and also the eligibility criteria they need in order to be able to access them. We could also create collaboration between stakeholders that supports green SMEs in terms of support to de-risk, as well as providing access to finance, and encourage creation of solutions in the renewable energy and wash sectors that were the least represented. Looking at how the green projects can improve access to finance for beneficiary SMEs, here are a few points we can consider. One is to center the key deliverables of incubation and acceleration programs to help these SMEs get investor ready. And this could be in terms of helping them set strategic goals, helping them to build competent teams, and also the need for them to appreciate keeping and reporting adequate records, and also ensuring compliance with legal bodies. Another point is providing access to available finance to help them validate their business, from which they could go on to create traction. And another is providing them with information on the various types of support that is available, and also creating links between institutions that offer these supports and also the viable green businesses that could be eligible to getting this support. Very soon we'll move into the discussion session. And before we do, here are a few questions or points that we could ponder. One is around the fact that pension funds do not invest in SMEs because of the risks that they present. So the question is, what are some de-risking mechanisms that could potentially change the narrative in favor of SMEs? And also, which of these mechanisms could we hold SMEs accountable for? Because we saw that some of the de-risking mechanisms are for the SMEs to implement, and for others, they would need support. Another point is that risk concerns by financial institutions are centered around the credit worthiness of SMEs. So with inadequate information on credit history, what are some ways that these concerns could be addressed? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Letitia, for the very insightful presentation. I think so. We are now at the point where people can come in either to comment on your findings or to ask questions, basically about your findings, your approach, and there can also be questions in general about the green project. So I would like to begin with, so there's a question here in the chat box about quote comes down to methodology. So the question says, are these findings from a survey, like a questionnaire shared with the SME support, or was it through in-depth interview? So this is more a question about the methodology you deployed. So if you could kindly explain the methodology you use for this research. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So it was a combination of survey and interviews. The surveys were mainly directed at the SMEs, and we had interviews with mainly the intermediary organizations and financial institutions. Did I answer the question?
Yes. So I think what you are saying is it's mixed. You had key informants with some of you had interviews with some of the institutions as well as survey the SME. So it's mixed. Peter Kumsen. I think I saw a hand up. Sorry. Anyway, Peter Crimson, your hand was up. Please, if he can be unmuted to make his point. Okay, please go ahead, Peter.
Can stop the people when they are moving against the ban. You can't stop them.
Peter Crimson, please go ahead. Your hand was up. Okay, sorry. Please, can you unmute something? Samson Abankwa, please. Samson Abankwa.
Yeah. Okay. Do I have the floor now?
Yes, please, you do.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am joining this call from the National Board for Small Scale Industries. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's very detailed and it's a very useful lessons for all of us. I think a lot of the things that has been mentioned are some of the things that actually MSMEs complain about when it comes to access to finance. But I was just trying to find out, maybe I missed the point. I wanted to find out when this survey was conducted. Is it post-COVID or pre-COVID? That is one question. And I was wondering if during your discussion, there were any, discussions with regards to what kind of support the MSMEs will require now that things have changed. COVID has changed a lot of things. That is one aspect. And I also want to find out from you whether you were interested in finding out the segment of the MSMEs, whether they are small, whether they are micro, or whether they are medium, as regards to which ones of these segments have more access and which part of this segment were very disadvantaged when it comes to access to funding in Ghana. And I'm also wondering whether you'll also be more interested in finding out about sources of funding and how many of these SMEs have bank accounts, and I mean how many of them are also banking, so to speak. Whether you also be interested in going forward. I'll also be very much interested in SNV's financing arrangement. I mean, how do you fund them? Do you give direct funding? Is it in technical assistance? And the question I'm asking is, I suppose that this survey is going to inform you as to the kind of support you're going to give to the MSMEs. So I just want to find out whether truly this survey is going to inform you as to the support that you're going to provide. And if so, how are you going to do it? What are your products? Is it going to be technical assistant direct? Are you going to deal with some financial institution or institution that provide funding support, or you're going to do it directly? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samson. So your question is in two parts. There's one for SME, and I think some also for those who did the research. So, Letitia, if you can come in, there's a question about when the survey was conducted. Was it pre-COVID, during COVID? I'm not sure if we are post-COVID yet. We are still waiting COVID. And did COVID feature in any of the findings? The size of the SMEs and in terms of access to finance, is there any variation? And the issues around banking, how are the SMEs banking, and how is that affecting access to finance? So, Letitia, please take over.
Okay, thank you. So this was conducted in September and October. And yes, we did ask them how COVID had affected their businesses. And most of them, the effects it had on the businesses had to do around revenue and yes, getting customers and revenue. Now, looking at what they needed funding for, there was a split between working capital and fixed assets. And so the working capital bit was what would have been mostly affected by COVID. The question on whether these SMEs were banking, yes, we had a number of them that identified having a business bank account. And the types of businesses. So it was split. We had some that were small, we had some that were, so MSMEs, we had a number of SMEs that were earning between 50,000 and 100,000 and above. We had some that were earning less than 5,000. So there was a mix between very small businesses and also SMEs, and SMEs that were performing very well. Is there any other that I may have missed?
Yeah, I think it's okay for now. Let me move on to SMV. So Genevieve is on. Genevieve, so there's a question around if SMV will provide any kind of direct support to SMEs in the area of finance, and in what form would that be? So if you could throw more light on that. I also realized that Ariana from UNCDF is on, and you lead on finance at UNCDF. So I think it will be interesting to hear from, since we are co-implementing this project, it will be interesting to hear from UNCDF too. So when Genevieve is done, Ariana, I would come to you to also throw a bit more light from your side, what you are doing, if you don't mind. Genevieve, please.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and thanks for the question. So the GrEEn financing for SMEs is going to be really through the Incubation and Acceleration Program. And we also have a challenge fund that is going to go to not just the SMEs in the incubation program, but in our sectors in the various regions. Although we will consider greatly the SMEs in incubation and acceleration program. So the challenge fund is a big one for us. It's a matching grant. And then we also have partnerships with financial institutions to provide financing for the SME. So it's a basket of options. So depending on what the SME qualifies for, we will try to match them to the various financial institutions like Wangara and a few others in the system. And then we also have crowdfunding platforms. So Ariana, I'm sure, will talk more about it when she talks about UNCDF's work. And then there are a few other crowdfunding platforms, especially with diaspora involvement, that we've identified that we'll be using to, or we're partnering with to support the SMEs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. If you could kindly unmute Ariana, maybe she could also speak briefly about, what we are doing to improve access to finance.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Thank you for giving me the possibility to complement. I think, just to be very brief, because I think it would be interesting to expand more on the research. As the team was saying, UNCDF is coming on board to complement, let's say, the access to finance challenge. In particular, what we are doing is to support the supply side, therefore, like financial service providers. And when I say financial service providers, it includes like a broad range of providers in order to offer tailored financial services for the targeted groups. How we do that? We do through technical assistance and financial support for those financial providers. The idea here is to test and develop new services and new innovative approaches to match, again, the demand and the supply of financial services. Because, of course, as the research has also outlined, if the SMEs do not have a credit history, nobody is going to lend them money. So how, and UNCDF is coming on board to provide the risking mechanism and make sure that the demand meets the supply and vice versa. Around the financial innovation that we are piloting, as Genevieve was saying, we have launched a crowdfunding initiative. I don't know if the audience is familiar with crowdfunding. Basically, there are platforms that actually let supply and demand, that let SMEs interested in accessing finance which are excluded by the financial sector to have a chance and raise funds. And on the other side, it channels the funds from the investors that are interested in investing in local opportunities such as the MSMEs in Ashanti and Western. I think I'll stop here because it can go a bit beyond of this let's say of this webinar, in case the audience has question, of course he can reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariana. Letitia, so there's a question here. So the question is, I understand the interest rate can be a challenge. However, sometimes it's always the first thing that emerges because it is easy to say, which, however, hides the much more in-depth issues that the SMEs have. So the question is, have you found anything on the whole value proposition offered by current financial institutions interested in green SMEs that is not adapted to green SMEs needs? The question again, have you found anything on the whole value proposition offered by current financial institutions interested in green SMEs that is not adapted to green SME needs? Is it clear, Letitia and team?
So does it mean financial institutions providing solution that doesn't necessarily meet what green SMEs want? Is this the question?
I'm not quite sure, but it's a rating question. So I think you should just a further clarification can come, but answer it, the way you understand it. Yeah.
Okay. So I hope this provides a response, but we found that there were very few financial institutions that were specifically targeting green SMEs. And we had a lot of them just looking at what impact are you creating? Can you demonstrate that your business model is viable and that there's a potential for growth, your team is intact, etc. And if you can meet these criteria, whether you're a green SME or not, you would be eligible to getting support from those financial institutions. And for those that are targeted at green SMEs, they're looking at specific sectors and also impact. So more specifically on impact and the sectors in which you belong. So this goes beyond looking just at interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, can I quickly add on?
Yes, go ahead, Nelson.
Okay,
so please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Nelson. I'm a CEO at Innohub. I'm happy to be part of this project. There was a second part of the question that was looking at incentives for FIs to get into the wash or green space. I wanted to essentially mention there's the Green Finance Initiative, which is a global initiative where, for example, I know a few banks in Ghana
Hello, Nelson. Have you lost Nelson?
Hello?
Hello, Nelson. I think we lost you.
No, can you hear me? I'm here. I'm still here.
Can you start over again? We lost you at some point. Continue.
Yeah, so I was making the point that in relation to the second part of the question that was posted, it was asking about incentives for FIs to get into the green space. And the point I was making was that there was the Green Finance Initiative, which is a global initiative that provides incentives and support for various agencies, including banks and financial institutions, to be able to get into the green space. So it provides funding as well. And I believe that, I think currently there are at least 2 banks in Ghana I know who have signed on to this project. And they should be able to really, through that kind of project, provide support for SMEs in the green space. So I just wanted to share the incentive for FIs to want to get into the green space, that there's a funding mechanism that they should be able to access, and that would help them to be able to provide support for this ecosystem, or for this sector of the ecosystem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelson. So that answers the second part of the question. Okay, so are any hands up?
Hi, Alex. I think in the Q&A, there is another question that reads, could you describe and give examples of the blended finance that SMEs have access to?
Okay, yes, I think so, from Daniela Mendoza. So yes, Letitia and Tim, if you could describe and give examples of the blended finance that SMEs have access to in Ghana. So if you can itemize a few that you came across.
Yes, thank you. So we have support coming in the form. Initially, we said blended finance comes in various forms. We mentioned debt, equity, grants, technical assistance. So in either of these forms, and the institutions that we presented, a snapshot of institutions that we presented do offer this support that we group under blended finance. So we saw institutions such as Wangara in the list, we saw SNB, we saw GrEEn, we saw a few banks that, in addition to traditional debt, offer technical assistance. We saw a standalone crowdfunding institution that, if the SME provides solar services, they could try to get access to this type of debt if they meet the criteria. So it's presented in various forms, but the interesting thing we saw is that what is most appreciated for SMEs and even MSMEs is the technical assistance, which could help them, technical assistance and also grants to validate the business model, which could help them to gain traction and then be eligible for other supports that they might not have been eligible to prior to those support or services.
Okay, and just to add quickly, I think there was a slide in the presentation that gives specific examples of that. So when the report is shared, I believe we could have all these detailed examples to refer to. And I believe the report will be shared with all people on the call.
Great, thank you very much. This is Daniela from Inclusive Business Sweden. So thank you for answering my question. It was clear.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, Daniela. So to reiterate, this research really is to help the SMEs, to just so they know where to go and how to prepare or organize themselves to be able to access some of these sources of finance that are out there. So yes, we will share the final report sometime next year, probably in January. We will share the final report with everyone who is on this call. But beyond that, it will also be with the Hub network and the SMEs that they work with. We'll also publish it on our website, so that then enables us to reach a larger number of SMEs, and they can have, they will have an idea of where to find what. So that was just to say, Mr. Samson Abankwa, I can see your hand up. If he can be unmuted.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity once again. I think this is just a suggestion. I can't go back to the first few slides that you shared on the institutions that provide financing, but it will be good to also look at what the GIZ has also done in green financing. I think it will be interesting to find more information on it. I also want to suggest that if you touch base with the National Board for Small Scale Industries, there is an ongoing research that has been commissioned to find financial product that meets search, has come out with a lot of products. Though this research is not specifically general, it's on specific green financing. It will be interesting to also have an idea of what the findings of that research from the NBSI side came up with regards to what products, existing financial product with the financial institution, because they have contacted a lot of financial institutions, both commercial banks and the rural banks, to come out with a lot of products. They've also made a lot of products that they think that these financial institutions should adopt to enable MSMEs have easy access to funding. So it's just a suggestion. Maybe you would want to before you come out with your report, want to look at these institutions to see what they have on their table, and then you expand the potential of your research. I think that's what I want to add. I will be joining another meeting.
Okay, sorry. So before you move on,
So,
just to be clear,
if I leave the platform, then
okay, sorry. So before you leave, just before you leave, just to find out, has the NBSSI study concluded? Can you confirm?
Can you ask the question? Can you ask the question again?
The NBSSI study that you referenced, have you concluded that study?
No, it's still ongoing, but they are far. They've reached very far. I think they are almost completing the study, and a lot of findings have been made. And I think it will be very interesting to share ideas on your research and also get some information from them.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, but you spoke about green finance. So let me also say that. So this research focused on blended finance. There is another one that is ongoing that focuses specifically on green finance. And for that one, would have
all right. Thanks for the
most likely on the 19th of January 2021. So we'll send you the invite, and but we will also mention the work NBSSI is doing, so they can reach out to you for additional information. So thank you very much, Mr. Bankwa.
All right. Okay. You're welcome. Yeah.
Are there any more questions? Let me look at the chat box. Okay, somebody's asking, can the report be shared here? No, sorry, the report, we haven't finalized the report here, so the report will not be shared here. But what you will have after this call is the presentation and a link to the webinar. But when the report is finalized, like I said, in January, it would be shared with everyone who is on this call. So not here, but later on next year, it would be shared.
Hi, Alex, there's a question in the chat box.
Okay, go ahead and read it.
So what are the benefits SMEs would get in regard to technical support when that SME is an upcoming SME? So I want to believe this question is in relation to TA support, which comes in diverse forms. It could be through the various incubation and accelerator programs, which have been run by SNV and various partners in Ashanti, Western, and Greater Accra regions. Again, there is also the hard-on TA, which could be in the form of business development or the product development support that SMEs receive. Now, some of these SMEs have the challenge of being able to pay or not being able to pay for TA service in terms of engaging consultants for support. So various TA programs, TA here being tech license program designed by entities like SNV and Co, really support these SMEs to design what you call scalable, viable, commercially sustainable business models at a point where they are now trying to really validate what they want to build as the business. The technical support typically supports them to really refine their business model and get to the place where they can really test it on the market and engage it towards its commercial viability. So it is quite an invaluable level of support that SMEs will typically need. And at the stage where they cannot pay for, enterprise support initiatives like this would always help them to acquire the needed support and build their businesses and eventually become investment ready. So that's the value this offers to SMEs at the early stage. That was from Richard. I hope this helps.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, thank you very much, Nelson. So the floor is still open for more questions. The floor is still open, but while we we look out for more questions. Genevieve, I would like you to perhaps throw a bit more light, in 1-2 minutes about our incubation and acceleration program. While we wait for people to come in with questions specific to this. Okay.
Yes, so the incubation and acceleration program we are running with partner hubs, 4 hubs in Kumasi, 3 in the Western region, and then Innohub in Accra is running the acceleration program. As we've said, our sectors are in agriculture, wash, and renewable energy. We've just completed the call for applications for cohort 1, so we are currently in the process of selecting the SMEs to start, but already we've opened the call for applications for cohort 2. So if you have any SMEs that you're in contact with in your networks, you can refer them to the SNV website so they can also apply. And so the SMEs that we are recruiting will be put in a 6-month incubation program and acceleration. And the focus for us is product development, is investment readiness, building sustainable green businesses. And so that's going to be it's more like a summary of what the program is going to offer. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. So then let's come back to the main research. Letitia, could you please go to the slide on I think there's a slide where you have the questions, the slide before this one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, yes, okay. So for me is to hear your own perspectives on this question, especially the very first one, where you ask about what are some of the de-risking mechanisms that could potentially change this narrative, and which of these mechanisms could we hold SMEs accountable for. It would be interesting to hear the perspective of Innohub, based on the research that you did. I'm sure you've mentioned some of them already, but we could now make it a bit more focused and look at what are some of the de-risking mechanisms that could change the narrative first, and what could we hold the SMEs accountable for. So it'll be interesting to hear your own perspective on these questions.
Thank you. So the initial idea was that if the SME has been in operation for a number of years, has a board of directors, and is also potentially registered on an exchange, they might perhaps be eligible to getting investment from pension funds. But we found out that even such companies may not meet up to the objectives or criteria of pension funds. So it could go beyond being formalized and having a competent team, possibly ensuring that you've been consistent throughout the years in which you've been operational, your cash flows are positive, and yes, I'm not sure how much of an impact they would be expected to make in terms of environment and social if we are veering towards looking at green SMEs, but then it's a high bar for them to meet up with. And okay, so looking at what we could hold SMEs accountable for, those are the things that we mentioned: consistency, your team in place, your focus, formalization, and so on. But then there's only so much they can do.
Okay, those are very Very interesting point. It'd be interesting to hear what the not quite sure if we have SMEs on board, but it would be interesting to hear what the SMEs also think of this. But we'll come back to this slide. Before then, there's a
Alex.
question. Hello, sorry, Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, you wanted
yes,
to contribute.
Yeah,
okay.
I just wanted to quickly add on again in terms.
Hello, Nelson. Hello, Nelson. Have we lost you?
No, I keep getting the poll thing coming on my page. And Alex, do you have, am I here?
Yes,
can you hear
you. Yes,
yeah, I keep
hear
getting
you.
the poll thing coming on my screen, and that takes me off when it comes. Yeah, so I was suggesting that for investors that would want to reduce their risk, you could look at milestone-based financing. That's one of the things that you could do to possibly reduce the risk, where if you want to tranche your investment over a period and then you set it to clear milestones as the SMEs achieve, then you can disperse subsequent rounds of financing to them. That could reduce that, rather than putting everything up front and then you don't know what may happen. Another way really would be to put in structures. So either you help with the finance function or governance function. All of these things are quite required to make sure the right things are being done by the businesses. If you, again, the milestones can keep the SMEs accountable. You can hold them accountable for those milestones. And then if you have finance functions, I know some cases where investors put in a financial controller from their team and help these SMEs to keep track of the numbers quite well. These are things that could be done to help de-risk some of these ventures for investment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nelson, for adding on to that question. You know, the de-risking mechanisms are so important. We'll come back to this slide. There's a question around gender. You know, to what extent gender featured in the research. So the specific question here is, did you probe to know differential factors influencing the financing of SME, especially along gender lines? So to what extent is gender influencing financing that SME receives? Did you find anything particular, anything that is interesting? Letitia?
Yes. So what we found interesting was what, for example, female-led SMEs perceived to be limiting their chances versus what male-led SMEs perceived to be limiting their finances. When it came to what they needed the funding for, we saw that it was uniform across the board. However, when it came to preparedness and what could limit them, we saw differences in the responses. For example, we saw that female-led SMEs were more likely to have had some documentation prepared when the response was much fewer looking at male-led SMEs. We also saw the differences in how limiting factors such as available collateral, interest rates were perceived between a female-led versus a male-led SME.
Okay, thank you very much, Letitia. Before we come back to this, I'm checking to see if there are any more questions. None at the moment. Okay, so let's come back to the second, the second question, and we could wrap up with this one. So as we say, risk concerns by financial institutions are centered around the credit worthiness of SMEs. This is, with inadequate information on credit history, what are the various ways these concerns could be addressed, especially for a project like GrEEn, working with SMEs, again, from what you have done, what could a project like, what are your perspectives? What can a project like GrEEn do or work with SMEs to improve this particular aspect? So yes.
Thank you. When it comes to financial institutions such as bank, one way that this is tackled is by ensuring that the business's company account is opened with the specific financial institution that is providing support, and this way they would be able to monitor the cash flow. But there was another option that Nelson mentioned earlier on with his first response, that is in tying funding to milestones and offering them in tranches. And this could also be the case where the institution hasn't built enough records in terms of transactions with any specific bank. And so you would be monitoring them in stages. And those are the stages in which the funding would be provided.
Okay, thank you very much, Leticia. Nelson, so following the tradition, would you want to add anything?
If I have to, maybe I'll add that if financial institutions could also look at options where some of the SMEs could do business on their balance sheet. That way the money is not wired directly to them, and that you're able to track whatever is happening. Or you could also have a position where you clearly, for example, financing their invoices as and when they come up for major purchases, especially if it's CapEx related. If it's OpEx, you could have the finance function handling those, and that can help you build the credit history with them. It reduces the risk, but also doesn't stop you from making a deal because you're not sure of their credit worthiness. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelson.
You're welcome.
But I think we are almost at the end of the webinar. And yeah, so yes, so thanks to everyone for participating. I don't think there are any more questions, so we try to we would bring the webinar to a close. But before then, a couple of announcements. I think I've already mentioned that we would share the link to the webinar, the recorded version, with all of you who are participating. But in addition, you can also visit our YouTube channel. The previous, all the recorded webinars we've had in the past are there, so you can. It's a place for you to get a lot of information about what the GrEEn project is doing, through SMB. In addition, there's a call for SMEs to apply to join the GrEEn project, either as incubatees or to join the acceleration program. So that is an ongoing call. We can keep sharing, those of us who have the link, we can keep sharing for SMEs apply. But the alternative is also to visit our social media handles, especially LinkedIn and Facebook. And you can see, okay, they're not here, but you can visit our Facebook and our LinkedIn pages. And once you scroll, you will find the links to these applications, and the SMEs can apply. Related to that, it's also for resource 2, where young people, so basically individuals, are applying to join the skills development training. So the call is also ongoing for people to be recruited and be trained in the Ashanti and Western region in very specific districts. Again, you can visit our Facebook handles and get the link to this. You can actually share this within your network. You can refer young people to this so they can also apply. So thank you very much. Those are the few announcements.
Alex, there's a hand up.
Oh, there is?
Kwabena
Okay.
Yeboah has his hand up. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was just a little contribution I wanted to add to the area of kind of like this de-risking in order to be able to properly fund. Kwabena Obriabwa from Social Entrepreneurship Hub. We in Takrady and we support also local businesses. And from experience, what we have observed is that if you're giving money to local businesses, sometimes also, I think some of the banks, I don't know, with the units that give even loans, sometimes there's a need for a certain level of capacity building in the area of financial management. You talked about boards, but a lot of the local businesses, might have boards on paper, but actually the board might not have even met before. It's maybe to fulfill a certain kind of obligation or criteria to maybe get some funding from the bank. So probably the banks might also be a bit proactive in that area of certain, they have units which take care of some of these things, but in terms of really getting to know the people that they give money to or whichever financing entity, really getting to know the individuals and helping them through the journey, because our environment is very risky and are very uncertain. So as the changes take place, if the entrepreneur is not able to get somebody to really have a conversation, then they are running around and you might not even get back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry for that. Sorry, Covenant, please, are you done? Sorry for the interruption.
So basically it's more, what I said was the journey when people go through any level of challenges and they don't have people to really have a conversation with, especially when they have taken monies or been granted a certain amount of money, then they go around doing what they think is right, but probably within that period, if they had somebody to properly talk to, so a certain level of engagement and support from financing entities would also go a long way to support these entrepreneurs, and even the financing entities working with their hubs and accelerators to support such financing options is also very good. I see some taking place through some of the activities you're doing, but I think more will also make it meaningful so that returns will be gotten out of a lot of the financial packages that are being given to our local businesses. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kovna. Those are very. The points you raise are very important. How to continuously engage the SMEs, understand their specific needs, and work with them or work with them along the way. So I think on this project we try to do that. As you said, through the hubs that we're working with, as well as the other service providers that would be coming on. We hope it will be an interesting learning journey, not just for the project, but for I'd say the ecosystem, the hub ecosystem within which we are working. Thank you very much again, Kwabena. Okay, at this point, I think I've already made the announcement. We have 7 more minutes for the time we give ourselves. It's good if we are able to finish on time. So if there are, I'll be looking out for the questions. If there are no other questions, we could probably end the webinar here. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Genevieve. I'm putting you on the spot. So Genevieve, if you could close us.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone who's joined in today. The questions and the feedback have been very useful, and we'll all go to inform the finalizing of the report. And as Alex has said, we will be sharing that once we've completed. I also want to say thank you to Innohub for a good job done on the research, and we hope that the work that is finalized is going to support the SMEs in the ecosystem, not just for our SMEs, but the entire ecosystem, even beyond the Ashanti and Western regions. So thank you, everyone. To Ariana from UNCDF, I've seen Camilla from SEED and a few others as well. We have people from our hubs also joining. I'm grateful. Thank you for joining and for all the contributions. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. So with that, we say thank you for participating. We wish you the best of the season. And what do we say? We say Afishapa. Happy New Year to all of you. I know it's 17th, but we may not meet again. So Afishapa to all of you. Do enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. So we end here now. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.